All right, so good morning, afternoon, evening, everyone, and welcome to this session on Anthropo zoonotic disease risk in fragmenting and fragmented landscapes. So we are here with 4 speakers. Unfortunately, some other couldn't join, but their abstracts and are on demand on the ICCB app. So welcome to the one that are here with us today. Maybe just a bit of context. We met with Cécile Sarabian, who is co-organizing this symposium in the IPS conference a few years ago. And we started to discuss about the need for more research in the field on the impact of fragmentation, which becomes more and more the rule and not the exception in the wild and on wildlife. And so we were trying to understand what kinds of impact besides the physical fragmentation could be happening on species. So we are very pleased that you are here today to share your different perspective on that. And without further ado, I think I'm going to ask Sakamaki to present his talk in 3 minutes so that you can briefly summarize what you've been sharing in your presentation, which is available on the app. And hopefully, yes, we're going to have some questions and people asking more about your research. Go ahead, please.
Thank you very much. My name is Tetsuya Sakamaki. Now I'm working for the Bonobo Conservation Project in Romako Yokokara Fauna Reserve since 2018. And now I'm in Kinshasa, in Democratic Republic of Congo. And Romako's project is a tourism project, Bonobo tourism project to facilitate scientific research and tourism. And this is the project of Antwerp Zoo Foundation in Belgium. Antwerp Zoo Foundation now carry out mainly 2 conservation projects in DRC, Okapi and the Bonobo. And the Bonobo project we carry out in Romako Forest. Okay, in my presentation this time, I talked about mainly the current situation of bonobo conservation in the north part of the Congo habitat. We call Maringa, Lopori, Wamba landscape. And first, there are 2 main conservation strategies, 2 strategies of bonobo conservation. The first one is to manage protected areas effectively and sustainably. And in the Maringa-Lopori-Wamba landscape, there are 4 reserves. First, I worked in Luo Reserve since 2007. And then I worked on the project to establish a new reserve. That reserve is Ionji Reserve, Ionji Community Bonobo Reserve, that was established in 2012. And now I'm working in the Romako Reserve. Romako Reserve was established in 2006. And now also we are also supporting the reserve authority. So ICC and Institut Congolais pour Conservation de Nature in DR Congo to support for the rangers patrols mainly. Okay, the second strategy of bonobos is to maintain wildlife connectivity zones. This is the second strategy. So first, briefly, I want to talk about the Maringa-Lopori-Wamba landscape situation. So this landscape is somehow far from urban centers, and human population is low and very poor infrastructure, and mostly dense evergreen forest covered this area. And local people are extremely depending on resource, natural resource in the forest. And human settlement mainly along the main road, and agriculture extending from the main road settlement into outward in the forest, such situation. And in this area, human population is growing, and agriculture also is expanding. So now I'm working in the Romaco forest for tourism project, but also and support protected areas patrolling. But sometimes we are considering how to maintain and make corridor connectivity between protected areas and also least disturbed areas. But so this time I have one important question, because so if we make a connectivity zone at that time, so because potential connecting zone close to the agriculture activities of local people. So connectivity zone probably to make connectivity may increase the risk of the increase contact for human local people to be contact with wild animals, also bonobos. So sometimes it may increase the risk of transmission disease. I now considering this risk. So I'm very beginner of zoonotic diseases. I'm just studying these days. So if I get good advice, I'll be happy. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And yes, sorry, I watched your talk, and there was a very interesting question that you were asking, which you just mentioned, is people think that maintaining or restoring continuity is an option, but as you mentioned it too, if you create too many corridors, it might also facilitate the penetration and the percolation of diseases like the Ebola outbreak in the gorillas and chimpanzees in Gabon and Congo a few years ago. So it is a very important issue that I think we should raise in the discussion later, because I think it's not as straightforward as people would imagine. So I have a few questions for you, but I propose that we move on to the next speaker. And so then we can have a general discussion about those maybe topics that we can brainstorm together. So I think I will invite Julia to present her talk in three minutes. Well, we have plenty of time, so we shouldn't be feeling pressured by the time.
Thank you very much. I'm going to put the stopwatch on so I don't go beyond the 2 minutes. The first thing I've got to say is that my work, or the work that we have been doing, is very different to a lot of the stuff that you are presenting. But I think what we have done in terms of modeling, etc., does support the work in the field, on the ground. And we start from the premise that we are looking at pathogeography, the application of biogeographical models, and to be able to look at the temporal and spatial relations of pathogens and reservoirs and vectors and the environment, etc. So we spent quite a bit of time actually concentrating on modeling Ebola. We published a number of papers already. And the main idea is to see, what are the drivers in a geographical sense that may be affecting sort of the transmission of a virus, in this case Ebola, could be any other, to, and we know there is a link between the butchering of wildlife, the use of wildlife, bushmeat, etc., and the outbreaks of EVD, the Ebola virus disease throughout Central and West Africa. We've actually modeled all that. We've looked at forest loss, for example, and we show very clearly that there is a correlation between where there are EVD outbreaks and where deforestation occurs. And we know from our studies that anything that happens, deforestation that happens 2 years before the outbreak, seems to be a precursor of the outbreak. You see what I mean? We've done work on fruit bats and the actual distribution of fruit bats in the area. And again, we see a very clear correlation between fruit bat distribution, forest loss, and human density. So these three things are connected. We can't just blame fruit bats, but we are saying that the reservoirs of Ebola disease and many other types seems to be the fruit bats. In this particular case, Ebola and African fruit bats have been linked through serology and PCR tests on these particular animals. So we are focusing on what mechanisms actually may be promoting the spillover from animals, from wildlife to humans, in fact, from wildlife to wildlife and wildlife to humans. I mean, the overall picture is quite dramatic, in fact. And I'm going to stop now because I'm 2 minutes, 55 seconds gone.
Thank you so much, Julia. I'm sure there will be room for more discussion because, again, look, I read your abstract, and it's interesting to consider the bats. Obviously, they have been incriminated in so many different disease outbreaks and blamed for that, especially the fruit bats. But I have some questions about your models and what you've been doing in terms of which bat species could actually be carrying Ebola. So I think we can bring that back later. And so without further ado, I'm going to invite Aaron to share his talk, which is very different, which is a very original topic. And I'm very curious to hear about your research. Thank you.
Okay, yes. So can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. So my talk is a bit different in that we published a paper earlier this year examining whether human pathogen disgust protects against infection. And we did a study amongst Shuar forager horticulturalists in the Ecuadorian Amazon. And we evaluated people's levels of disgust sensitivity and then measured 2 different ways of measuring infections. We looked at inflammatory biomarkers and we looked at infection with helminths using fecal samples. And so what we found was that people's disgust sensitivity protected them against the infections as measured by the inflammatory biomarkers. And we found strong degrees of clustering in people's levels of disgust and the kinds of things they were disgusted to at both the household and the village level. We did this study across 3 different villages with quite a few different households. And so, and we found there was a lot of clustering in terms of helminth infections, but less of a direct protective effect of disgust on helminths, perhaps due to the way that they're transmitted within communities. So part of the study, though, we had variance between these communities in terms of the degree of market integration for each of these communities and how much they relied on things like hunting for their subsistence. And what we found is that, people in the most market integrated communities that were relying less on things like hunting for their subsistence had higher levels of disgust and lower levels of infection. And so for this particular talk, we did a reanalysis of some of this data to look at the individual disgust items that might be related to market integration being this a change as people switch from hunting economies to more market-based economies. And what we found is the discussed items that change the most with that are things that are related to those subsistence activities and likely related to involvement in hunting. So things like disgust against dead animals and things like that, and are probably likely the things that are most protective against zoonotic disease risk as well. And so that was kind of tying it in with the zoonotic disease risk were these discussed items, suggesting that, as people switch their subsistence strategies, as their foraging strategies change, and as they start engaging in market economies, the kinds of things they're disgusted by may change, and that may affect their interactions with wildlife and their zoonotic disease risk. So that's the summary.
Yeah,
I'm just gonna paste the link into the chat here in case anyone wants to look at the paper, as well as a preprint we just put up discussing how as humans first transitioned to carnivory in our distant evolutionary past, that may have changed our zoonotic disease risk, and that may have been a strong selective pressure on humans to develop healthcare, for example. So be curious if anybody has thoughts about that as well.
Well, I think this is Cecil's domain, for sure. Cecil?
Yeah, great. I mean, of course, I'm definitely interested in that topic, and I think it's not necessarily that distant from other talks. So as for myself, I'm interested in, for example, how fragmentation may impact pathogen disgust sensitivity or parasite avoidance, but in non-human primates. And so that's the topic I've been working on over the past couple of years. And so in this presentation, or this perspective talk that we put together with Anne, we were basically asking whether habitat fragmentation may influence perceived predation and disease risk at an ecosystem level, and thus shaping a new landscape of peril, so which is how animals navigate between both predation and disease pressures in their natural environment. And more specifically, we were asking whether fragmentation impacts the predator-prey and pathogen-host dynamic with an immunological, behavioral, and ecological, at different levels of ecological organization. And the last perspective was epidemiological. And to do so, we relied on a preliminary case study with an unhabituated community of Eastern chimpanzees that Anne has been studying over the past couple of years, living in relict and refuge forest fragments of the Albertine Rift in Eastern DR Congo in the Ituri province. And we described a scenario for potential fecal-oral parasite transmission from humans living in nearby villages to chimpanzees and potentially other non-human primates via, for example, drainage of soiled wastewater, because these human settlements are located atop rivers, and this wastewater may later on penetrate these forest fragments and expose other primates and wildlife. How this proximity with humans may impact chimpanzees' fitness via, for example, snare encounters and the injuries that they cause, weaken their immune system by constraining behavior to or at specific sites, or make them more susceptible to other predation and disease risk via cascading effects by influencing, for example, their nesting behavior. So finally, at an ecosystem level, we show via preliminary data how fragmentation may increase disease risk by increasing landscape sharing with commensal mammal species such as baboons, insectivores, rodents. And so this preliminary analysis showed that the most degraded the forest fragment is, the more commensal species such as rodents, genets, and baboons are, whereas an opposite pattern was found for the less degraded fragment. So this is for the summary of the talk. And then, I would also have questions for Aaron later on their study and the potential parallels that I can see for investigating this relation in non-human animals. Sorry.
Thank you, Cecile. My connection is very unstable, but if I pop out, I will reconnect with another network. So thank you, all of you, for sharing your research. Maybe I would like to actually bounce back on what has been said by Aaron about the carnivory, even though you didn't really present it in your talk, because this is a question we were also asking. If you have more carnivores and rodents, our non-human primates are going to switch to them because they also hunt. Chimpanzees hunt, and as such, it's interesting to try to imagine that they might be switching to those unexpected prey because their normal prey, which are colobus, are not present anymore. So I would like to think to hear a bit more about the carnivory switch and what it brought to the human of the primates.
Well, the idea for humans is that it would have just increased contact with wildlife in general, as well as, a lot of the zoonotic transmission from hunting is exposure to feces and blood and things like that during hunting. And so if humans switched from primarily plant-based diets to much more carnivory, they would have been infected with more zoonotic diseases. And then we additionally make the argument that that's selected for humans have some unique immunological adaptations, things like increased gut pH relative to other primates and increased sensitivity to LPS and some other things like that, which is a molecule that's on the outside of gram-negative bacteria. And then we argue that with this increased zoonotic disease risk, humans may have also started using more medicinal plants, and that may have been important for the evolution of human plant use, and in particular things like psychotropic drug use, which things like nicotine, caffeine, these are all sort of anti-parasite molecules that are produced by plants that people may consume regularly as prophylactics against infection. And so we make the argument that that's a human particular adaptation. So that's the basic argument of that particular paper, and that this may have been further selection for driving encephalization in humans, brain size evolution, as well as the use of all kinds of drugs that humans use.
I think it's very interesting, Aaron. I mean, I don't know whether you are able to come up with a threshold number of plants that people are using. What I mean to say is that if you compare, for example, we're working a lot with Baka people, groups in southern Cameroon, and we report more than 200 different plants are being used for different purposes by these meat-eating communities, because essentially the protein. Would you say that they are an outlier? Would you, I mean, what you're saying is that there is a shift. If there is a shift to plant eating, it's because there is disgust to meat. Sorry, I'm rambling a bit, but I mean, is there a limit to the number of plants that people are using if they are moving towards meat or away from meat?
I don't know if anyone's ever done the analysis quite that way in terms of different human groups and their consumption of meat and how that might relate to their plant use. It is quite common to use spices, plants on meat that often help preserve the meat or may have antibacterial properties.
Yeah.
But yeah, I don't know if they're an outlier. I think many traditional groups will have a wide range of plants that they use, although much of that knowledge is being lost.
I know.
Yeah, as things are supplanted by Western medicine. which, much of which has its own origins in plant products as well, originally. But,
and of course, if you bring it back to the fragmentation problem that we're talking about, that's we certainly see that in the Barker groups that the more fragmented the habitat, the less they have to eat and use plants, etc. So it's a major issue, not just to primates or non-human primates. Obviously, it's a major issue to humans as well. Yeah.
Yeah, one interesting question I had was about the fragmentation and market integration as people's economies change, and particularly as people switch from using hunting and bushmeat to other sources of protein. Often that's because their environments are degraded and the hunting is poor. But at the same time, that may reduce their interactions with wildlife and may have reduced some zoonotic transmission in both directions. So curious to hear more about that from everyone here too.
I would definitely like to start thinking in those terms in our African sites, because I mean that's very interesting to actually see with people that are not that dependent on wildlife are actually less ill and all that. And I mean, some work done by Victoria Reyes on Barker, they show very clearly that the people that are closer to markets, in other words, along the roadsides, are poorly, more ill. I don't know what they, than those that are still itinerant and live in the forest itself. So it'd be really interesting to look at that. I think I will read your papers and certainly get in touch with you.
Yeah, I think the dynamic of behavioral change and with market integration is quite complex, because if we think of just access to sanitary behaviors, just because there is water, there is so there is for sure behavioral change, and hygienic behaviors may be more present because of this access to water and
maybe not.
Yeah, at least there is no. The constraint may not be there, but I think there could be also a dissociation between hygienic behaviors, for example, and even pathogen disgust sensitivity. To me, it's not. Disgust may be still there for populations living in the forest, but the expression of behaviors may differ. So I'm maybe going on another line here, but I was thinking, Aaron, if so for actually assessing pathogen disgust sensitivity, your team used questionnaires, right? I was wondering if you thought of, or if it would be possible to use more so behavioral observations or even experiments with these communities that could even be replicated with other human communities in other countries. So would there be ways of testing behavior without questionnaires? For example, measuring interactions with domestic and wild animals, even assessing the frequency of hand washing or any sanitary behaviors, and comparing this between market integrated communities and people living closer to the forest, and just with observation, contact with animals' bodily fluids, or even conducting experiments regarding contaminated food avoidance, and etc. So I was wondering if you could reflect on that.
Yeah, I think you could certainly, look at people's sanitary behaviors, their meat handling behaviors, and those things you could probably do through behavioral observation, which would be much more time consuming than doing a questionnaire. But, has certain advantages definitely to being a more direct measure of what people are actually doing, other than what they say they're doing, which are not always the same thing.
Yeah, exactly. And you compare maybe whether the questionnaire is actually reflecting the behavior of the people. Which...
And you could definitely do experiments where, you know, you show people pictures and things like that, or other kinds of things, and measure their reactions. But yeah, it's a big difference between studying non-human primates and humans is the being able to ask questions of your subjects. Yeah. So how do you measure in primates when you're trying to look at?
Yeah, it depends on the populations or the communities we work with. So we have been able to test that mainly with semi-free ranging non-human primates, meaning provisioned populations, or in sanctuaries where they would be exposed to, so mainly in a foraging context, they would be exposed to different food associated with sensory cues of biological contaminants. So feces, other bodily fluids, such as even blood or semen through olfactory cues, for example, or even tactile cues mimicking the softness and moistness of substrates that usually harbor pathogenic agents. So we were able to do that mainly with captive or semi-free ranging populations. So in the wild, it's the same. It's a bit more. I mean, experiments would be, just from an ethical point of view, much harder to carry on. But I think just from the behavioral and from an observation perspective, we could still do probably more with now putting camera traps at sites where all these species interact, for example. And has some fascinating preliminary data on that, as how chimpanzees may interact with rodents or bats. So better understanding all this dynamic, I think, is definitely something we should better look at. And so for non-human primates, just to finish on that. So when I read your paper, I was quite interested in, of course, in this link between pathogen discussed and the prevalence and intensity of gastrointestinal parasites that you found, because we were also able to do that with Japanese macaques, with helminths and bonobos, actually, showing how their avoidance of contaminated foods also correlated with lower intensity of gastrointestinal parasites. So this is something that now your paper adds more onto this this correlation between behavior and levels of infection. And I think we need to test more. And you wanted to jump.
Yeah, I wanted to jump on the disgust. Like the development of disgust also. When you have visual clues, for example, like with the COVID, you don't have so many visual clues, so people maybe don't avoid it so much. While, for example, and that's the question I wanted also to ask to Sakamaki is, so I worked a lot on monkeypox, and this is clearly very visual, right? You have pox lesions, and as a human, you would definitely definitely avoid someone with those smallpox-like lesions. But actually, it is not the case in those communities, in rural communities or forest communities. They still keep sending the kids at school. They still keep hugging and sleeping together, even if the kid of the person is covered with those lesions. And I was wondering, because the bonobo site, which is on the left bank of the Congo River, is actually located in the monkeypox endemic area of the DRC. And I was wondering if you had ever seen monkeypox outbreaks in the bonobos, because it's been reported in the chimpanzees in several places. And I was very curious to know if you had ever seen that, and if there was some avoidance behavior of the sick in bonobos, because in chimpanzees, it's not so straightforward. There was recently an outbreak in the Thai forest, and they were not isolating the sick chimpanzees. So I'd be curious to know about the bonobo and their reaction to that.
I know some researchers are studying monkeypox in the one town borne in the bonobo habitat, but I'm sorry, but I don't know well about monkeypox. So, for example, which symptoms animals show? I don't know well monkeypox.
So you mean, I'm sorry, my connection is very bad. You mean the disease, the monkeypox disease? So, oh, if you, or you
the
don't know.
symptoms in non-humans, and if there is any.
Yes, they are actually in those primates, they have smallpox-like lesions. So you really have, cutaneous lesions over the body, the hands, the feet, the face. So it's very, very visual. And so I was really curious to know, and I haven't had the time to look if there was some monkeypox outbreak reported in the literature. Maybe also, Cecile, you have an idea. In chimpanzees, clearly there is. And it's very visual. Yeah.
So I don't know the bonobo with monkeypox, but now I have not heard monkeypox or bonobos at my study site. But I know some researchers come to the bonobo areas to study monkeypox. Mainly, they collected some mice, some small mammals near the villages. I heard that, but I don't know where. Sorry.
Yeah, me neither. I haven't seen or heard about it, but if we focus on the visual cues, I think Sakamaki-san and colleagues have papers about respiratory disease outbreaks in Wamba, but also in other sites. And this can be also quite visual. So I've witnessed it myself when I was there, and this is kind of anecdotal, but still, so all the bonobo group we were following had this runny nose and trouble respirating, coughing. And interestingly, I was just thinking at that time, I mean, everyone in the village also like showed similar symptoms, including the domestic animals. So I was really wondering who started there, what was the dynamic. But as for the bonobos themselves, and with these symptoms, the runny nose and etc., like, I could also measure their frequency of doing this pick-lick behavior, or only among themselves, so they wouldn't do so on other individuals, but they would they would basically lick the mucus that is running out of their nose. It would, so there could be ways, and between the mother and the offspring doing that. So there would definitely be transmission going on. But it would be interesting to study that, for example, for more distant individuals. What is interesting with this contact with bodily fluids is that it's also often from their own or closely affiliated individuals. It's a bit less frequent when it's from more distant, between more distant individuals in the case of transmission. But just to mention that for other disease, there are visual cues, and this could be studied. Yeah.
I'd like to bring back, if possible, the conversation to the more macro scale. I mean, I'm already getting some pretty great ideas from all of you in terms of the mechanism of transmission between animals and humans and all that. And for us, it's been very important to look at what are the potential consequences of forest loss. We talk about, the question is fragmentation actually causing these greater transmissions of disease between wildlife and humans, etc. And we postulated basically that if there is fragmentation, there's going to be an alteration of pathogen circulation. Nathan Wolfe used to talk about viral chatter. There's, if you unbalance the actual pathogen and host situation, you're going to get greater number of viruses coming along. You're also going to change the composition, abundance, and behavior of reservoir species. And of course, you're going to increase the animal-human contacts. And, you know, all the stuff that you've been talking about actually fits incredibly well into that network of interactions. And I think for us, it's incredibly important, not just to look at it from, we look at it from a satellite point of view, but we work in the field as well, of course. But these mechanisms of how diseases are transmitted is incredibly important to include in the modeling that we are carrying out. And well, thank you very much for alerting us on that. And we're looking at things like hand washing, etc., in a project that we're going to start in Cameroon. And I think it's incredibly important. Your thing on disgust already has got me thinking more about what we should do. And the sniveling chimpanzees and people is another way that we can get into it. And I think it's incredibly interesting. So let's have a look at the overall framework always, as well as the details, is my point.
Yeah, I think local scale is always teach us, yeah, they are good examples, and then they can be generalized if you test them in different settings.
I mean, I don't know.
Environments.
Sorry, yeah, you're breaking up.
Yeah, I know connection is really poor. So I'm going to repeat that. I think the cave environment everywhere is clearly showing that there are interactions with multiple species, and there is a room for pathogen exchange and interspecific interactions that we wouldn't have thought of. Yeah. And for example, too, you have behaviors like rock licking, and you have multiple species coming there. So you can also see that you might have also immunity developing or triggers for better immunity because they are being exposed to the multi-species. Yeah. So this is fascinating, I think, and it's just by chance that we started seeing this with camera traps. But yeah, it also gave me a lot of thought about how immunity can develop in those special sites. And if with fragmentation, they don't have access to those sites, then are they going to become even more vulnerable to the diseases or anthropozoonotic diseases that are circulating and being introduced with encroachment?
Yeah, this thing about the changes in species composition, for us, it's very interesting during fragmentation, because often, the first species to disappear, of course, are large-bodied animals, and you get what we call density compensation, and you could get smaller animals that are more pathogen laden, that are going to be much more in contact with humans in fragmented habitats. I mean, again, that's hypothesis. I don't know whether any of you have any concrete empirical data on that, but we think that's happening. For example, number of bats increases, number of rodents increase, number of whatever, are these animals carrying more disease and therefore more in contact in fragmented habitats, because that's where humans go.
I think Anne has some preliminary data on that. So that's what in the presentation we started incorporating, showing how this community of chimpanzees, if you remember, lives in 3 different forest fragments. And Anne started analyzing the camera trap data, showing that the most degraded fragment was showing like the most commensal mammal species. So yeah. And whereas the less degraded fragment wasn't. So it seems that that's where, basically mammal species carrying pathogens aggregate. I don't know if anyone wants to follow up on that, but
yeah, especially rodents, and also in terms of rodent and density of rodents. This is actually impressive. So you have really an increase. And And well, in the talk we mentioned it, but so this is also the only area in the world where apes live in a plague endemic area. And so you also have those rodents that are living around those crop fields, and the more crop field, then the people also set fires. So it's also like chasing those rodents inside the forest and along the edges. And we have no idea if chimpanzees have died of plague in the wild, and if this happened, how often, or if they would interact with dead rats if they were a rodent die-off, And this is also fascinating. Yeah.
Have you ever seen chimpanzees eating rats?
So I haven't. I know there is this famous picture of a young chimpanzee that Jane Goodall was studying and looking at the rat. It is one of the famous pictures. Cecil has probably more to say about that, but they seem not to interact too much. I remember discussing with Fabian Leenders, working in Thai. I think they had found like some mastomys hair in some feces, but it's a very rare event, right. It seems. But it might be increasing. Yeah, Sakamaki,
I'm not aware of any direct interaction. I haven't observed it myself. But as you mentioned, about more indirect interactions in caves and outcrops, and particularly when these sites imply or involve, behaviors for transmission. If they perform rock licking, if you have bats roosting, if you have rodents also foraging, and which means defecation at the same time, and chimps perform some behaviors implying or involving their mouth, then it's easy to kind of portray how transmission may occur. But for direct observation, no, I'm not aware of that. But as we're thinking with Anne, it could be fascinating to run some experiments on that. Also on how chimps would react to that, or to the cues, to cues of rodents, whether there is some kind of innate mechanisms of recognition of mammals that are more susceptible to carry disease, these kind of things.
Yeah. Sakamaki, you wanted to say something?
Before I studied chimpanzees in Tanzania, wild chimpanzees, but I haven't seen interaction between chimpanzee and the rats. Bonobo, sometimes they eat squirrel.
Right.
But not
really?
rats.
Yeah, in Wombat they capture sometimes squirrels and they eat it.
But probably no. Bonobo at Wombat they don't eat squirrel.
Flying
squirrel.
I've seen that.
Squirrel. Yes.
Yeah, so maybe less terrestrial, but.
And that's interesting because squirrel are supposedly the reservoir of monkeypox. So this is a very interesting one.
Including flying squirrels?
I was going to ask Anne, because I know that EcoHealth Alliance has been working on number of pathogens, at least viruses, in different types of fragmented habitats. I haven't seen that data being published, actually. Do you know about that? Maybe that's a general question. Because that information would be really interesting. Does fragmented habitat actually increases, like we said, the amount of pathogens that are around in an area?
So yeah, it broke up, but I think I understood your question. So there are a few papers published on the invasion of rodents in fragmenting landscapes, and also vector-borne diseases. And so the more, if you only have crops and palm oil plantation, like being close to the forest edges, it brings more rodent, changes the dynamics and the risk of different disease like Lassa, for example, in West Africa. So, but there are a few studies also from Carlos Zambrana Torello who published on the risk of vector-borne disease associated with forest fragmentation, opening, clearing, the increase in the number of ponds, and so the increase in the number of mosquito vectors. And that's why it's a shame that Daraka is not here, because she had also very interesting results showing the risk of dengue and chikungunya and malaria transmission from wild primates in Thailand to different primate species and to humans. But I hope she will interact and also answer the questions I posted. But yeah, so there are a few papers that you can look, especially Carlos Zambrana has been working a lot on that. And yeah, so I wanted to go back actually to the place that I know you've been doing a modeling at a general scale. I don't know if you targeted a special, like bat species. You mentioned frugivorous bat species, but I've always had a question. I have no answer to that, and probably we don't have yet. Because of Ebola outbreaks are very stochastic, they are unpredictable. Yet they seem to have been coming back in right now, like in Kivus. In the Kivu, it seems that around Beni, there is like endemic focus, but who knows? Or there is a population that it's not moving too much. And so my question is, since those bats are flying long distance, the frugivorous, and they are very mobile, what about those more like smaller species that don't move too much, and actually that because you would expect more outbreaks if this was those frugivorous species spreading the virus. So I've always wondered if it was not like a more forest dwelling species, like cave dwelling, mine, hollow tree trunks. And then sometimes during seasonal migrations of those big bats, they come into contact with those smaller species. So what is your view or opinion on that?
Well, my opinion is that we still don't know very much about that. I mean, I take your point that there could be smaller species that may be involved, insectivorous ones. For example, the work that Sais did in West Africa, she seemed to have linked the zero case to mops, an insectivorous bat found in a particular tree. And I think we need to have a look at that a bit more intensely. All I can tell you is that we've looked at 20 fruit bat species and their distribution around the Ebola virus areas. And certainly 3 of them have tested positive using PCR, and at least 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. 9 of them have tested positive using serology. So, we started from the premise that it is implicated. Fruit bats seem to be implicated because they carry the virus, etc. I mean, that's a huge field of work. But out of the 20 species that we looked at, these have either serology positive or PCR positive. And when we look at fragmentation and we look at EVD outbreaks, etc., we seem to find a correlation between the distribution, the favorable areas for the fruit bats, and forest loss and EVD. You see what I mean? So that's our approach, but I'm completely convinced that we've got to do more, and possibly we should be looking at insectivorous species such as mops and others, because they could be carrying. And looking for Ebola virus is like looking for a needle in a haystack. But mind you, some colleagues of ours have actually been very successful in detecting Ebola in DRC. You know about that work, Anne. So my point is, let's expand our searches. Let's do things that are far more effective in terms of pointing the finger at potential areas. And I'm a great believer in natural history, but I don't think natural history is all we need to do in order to solve a problem. So Does that answer your questions?
Partially.
Partly. Yeah.
And actually, I would like to go back to Aaron also. Those people, so the Shuar people, are they? So you said that they had subsistence and they were hunting. Do they eat bats? Are they exposed to them? Do they avoid them? Because it's interesting to also compare that in human population, you know, we wouldn't, I mean, I wouldn't eat a bat, and potentially it's because we associate that with rabies or witchcraft. Who knows how it developed, right? Like we avoid rats potentially because of plague and, you know, this unconscious history of exposure. So I was very curious to know if those people in Ecuador, they were, yeah, what's the relationship with those weird animals?
Yeah, I don't think they eat bats, at least not
No.
not preferentially. You know, I'm not. Someone might sometimes, but you know, that's not something they're going to seek out. I don't think they eat a lot of other primates, though. Different kinds of monkeys, which are probably a possible source of transmission there. Rodents, well, not the small kind.
Agoutis.
Yeah, agoutis and things like that. Agoutis, pacas, capybara.
Yeah, those big ones.
There's some deer, small deer.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, I can see Daraka is trying to join. Hi, Daraka, can you hear us?
I think there is no mic and no video on, so maybe she's just joining the session, I think.
Right.
She will not be able to speak. But just following up on that, I think we have a big comparative study to carry there with the relation of people regarding all these species that may or do carry disease, because yeah, it's quite interesting.
And also making comparisons between certainly all the tropical areas, but Africa and South America. You know, we've done lots of work sort of looking at the community of mammals that are found in each of these forest types, and the forests in the Congo Basin versus forests in the Amazon. And one of the things that strikes you is the fact that you were dealing with a lot more species and larger biomass of mammals in the Congo Basin than the Amazon Basin. Does that have implications on disease transmission? You know, humans in Africa have been exposed to these animals for millennia or thousands of years. That hasn't happened in South America. So does that change the dynamics of disease and whatever? And fragmentation, let's put in fragmentation.
Yeah, because it will be interesting to compare indeed, if there is a change in attitude when you live on the edge, or when attitude towards those animals as the fragmentation is happening, right? Compared to the people living in continuous forest, and they might be less exposed to those invasive, or let's say commensal or opportunistic species, which may be the one carrying diseases. So yeah, and it will be interesting to indeed go across cross analysis, a mega transect of camera traps. From the apps, just to see if it's trying to join, but I can't see.
Yeah, in the meantime, is there any other, I don't know, any other comment, question that someone would like to bring?
I'd like to ask, I'm sorry, I don't want to talk too much, but I'd like to ask Aaron, in many ways, I mean, you're saying that disgust is correlated with civilization sort of thing. Is that correct?
Yeah, it's correlated with the way we think about it is it's correlated with the relative costs and benefits of disgust. You know, if you don't have anything else to eat, you can't afford to be disgusted by something.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. So, you know, the more affluent you are, the more you can be picky, particularly when it comes to like food. But also, if you have access to sanitation, you can be pickier about other people and their hygiene and things like that too. So to some extent, I don't know if it's best to think of it as it's activated by that, or if it's just kind of suppressed when you can't afford to be disgusted, or when you just can't get away from something.
And my follow-up question is, do you see any form of sanitation in the Schwa groups that you worked on? In
the forest?
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, yes, people go away from their houses to use the bathroom, for example.
Yeah.
There's, you might use the bathroom on a leaf and throw it into the woods. It's not the most sanitary. People wash, but they wash in rivers, which may not be the cleanest rivers. So those are the kinds of sanitation, right? So yeah, water sources are maybe rivers or springs. Yeah.
Has anyone, and my last question from Assam and Cecile, has anyone looked at the potential of disease in middens in your part of the world?
Not that I know of, in terms of like sampling and looking to see what's there. Yeah, but I may just be unaware of that. Yeah.
Okay.
But not that I know of.
Thanks.
Yeah, just to follow up on that, I think and to finish maybe on that. Yeah, I think for this guest, it's good to think of it with trade-off. I would put that as trade-off, not necessarily that I think it disappears or it's not present in communities or populations living in less in environments where they don't have access to water and etc. But yeah, the environment is so different, and the access or restriction to things for sanitation may shape the behavior, and but yeah, always think of it as trade-off. But if we look at it from an evolutionary perspective, I think it should still be there. So it should be according to their environment and what are the risks for them. Of course, if there is a higher nutritional benefits, that's what we actually showed in non-human primates. So if you contaminate food, or if you put a grain of wheat atop a conspecific feces, the Japanese macaques would not go for it. But if you replace the grain of wheat by just half a peanut, which represents 16 times more calorie and that they love, they would definitely go for it all the time. So yeah, I think always thinking of these trade-offs. What are the costs and what are the benefits? And if the benefits are higher, then yeah, there may be a leverage of aversion or avoidance. But yeah, it would definitely be more very interesting to go deeper into these behaviors that, of course, from our perspective, we would consider as not very sanitary or etc. But maybe from their perspective, dealing with only what's there, and the thinking of it or behind it would be very interesting.
But I would also argue, Cecile, that maybe a Japanese macaque not touching a piece of wheat has been contaminated by feces is that they're getting other clues. The smell, for example, is, they don't know whether that's contaminated or bad, or they may be reacting to the smell. I mean, I don't know. It's interesting.
Yeah. So that's why after we conducted more tests on which sensory cues they use, but same as for the peanut. I mean,
yeah.
So
food for thought.
Yes.
So yeah, I would like to actually bring back maybe the first question that was probably raised and to all of you is a question in the project that we develop and that we are and discussion that are ongoing. As I was mentioning in the beginning, the fact that, yeah, we are always blaming fragmentation, you know, and seeing it as a bad thing. And it's clear that, you know, opening habitat, creating edges, create a lot of new surface of interspecific exchanges, ways for penetration, percolation of human, people, livestock, and yeah, for the creation of new ecosystem or networks of interactions. But from a disease transmission perspective, I would be curious to hear your thought, because in terms of erosion, but also in terms of erosion of behavior and creation of new behaviors that is adapting to this fragmentation, do we see like fragmentation always as a negative? Is it protective, or is it creating more trouble always? So that's a question I want to bring, because I'm not sure this is straightforward, and there are probably millions of answers and case studies, but I'd like to hear your thought about that.
Maybe you are the much well placed. I don't know. Yeah.
But are you suggesting that fragmentation will generate a series of responses in humans and primates that would allow them to live in an area which could be more dangerous than a primary forest? Is that your question?
Can you I'm sorry, can you repeat it?
No, I was trying to paraphrase what you've said, Anne. Are you saying that fragmentation actually promotes certain evolutionary advantageous behaviors that can allow people to subsist in fragmented habitats?
Yeah, or species.
Or species. Well, they do.
Yeah.
We know they do. Because simply the distribution of resources is going to change. You know, cover and food, for example, for a rabbit in a fragmented habitat is going to be very different from a rabbit in a forest. Not that at least the European rabbits don't live too much in forest. But you see, the distribution of resources is going to change immediately for a species. So therefore, you've got to adapt. Most species are central place foragers. So you need an area of cover or shelter, and you need to move to it. So fragmentation actually changes that orientation, you know, the spatial orientation of that. So is that behavior good enough to change the evolution of that particular species? Maybe. We've done it. Human beings, hominids, changed when they went from forests into open areas. So.
Yeah, that happened much more slowly than present day fragmentation, giving time for adaptation. So I don't know if there's time for evolutionary adaptation, you know, with present day fragmentation.
But behavioral adaptation is, as you say, it's happening. But
yeah,
whether that changes everything else, who knows? More time.
Yeah, and that's why I was asking the question, because well, I see Cliff Hicks has been joining, but it is also a discussion we were having in terms of behavioral erosion and also emergence of new behavior, and again about, you know, how the immune system develop, and when you face new environment, then what does that actually offer as an advantage or disadvantage. But another thing we've been also looking at with a student is, so we analyzed the genetics of Hippocideros ruber, which is a very small bat living in forest areas. And we could really show that there are 4 different clades that are spread across the African range. And we can already see at the molecular level that they are haplotypes and haplogroups according to the openness of the habitat. So even if the fragmentation has been quite fast, it seems that we can already detect it at the molecular level. And from the genetics, we can already kind of deduct some habitat openness and change. So it might be even happening faster in genetically. And so immunologically, what does that bring to, you see? And those questions are clearly, there are large field of research for that. Yeah, the talk is posted on another symposium, the one on elusive species of the Congo Basin, if you are interested.
Yeah.
Hello, Clive, welcome.
Hi, thanks. I wasn't quite clear if, are people watching the thing at the actual conference, or to watch it you have to come on to here? I mean, I'm happy to be here. I just wasn't quite clear on what the setup was. Sorry.
Oh, well, the format has changed. We were supposed to be on the Zoom, on the live stream, but then we switched on Zoom, and then there was no attendees. So we have a great discussion.
Excellent. I'm happy to be here. I don't have much to say, but I will be listening. So thanks.
Yeah, I would like maybe to give also, I would like to hear, Sagamaki, what you are thinking from the different places where you've been working on the bonobo. And you mentioned, you are probably the only one who mentioned tourism and the effect of tourism on the species and the risk to them. So I would like you to maybe discuss more the risk, and how do you deal with the risk of introducing disease, either from researcher or from ecotourists in those sites. And yeah, how do you protect somehow those populations that you habituate versus the one that you keep watching from a different angle or further angle?
Thank you. So now I'm working at Romako. So the situation is inside the reserve. So we are controlling and we are protecting bonobos. So local people usually don't enter the forest. Outside the reserve, now population, human population is growing, and the agriculture field also expanding. We need to consider how to manage outside of the reserve. And also fragmentation also areas increasing. Now, not only fragmentation, but also probably movement of human also important. For example, first I studied bonobo at one long-term study site, Wamba. Researchers habituated bonobos there at the Wamba in 1970s by provisioning sugar cane. But at Wamba, first outbreak of respiratory diseases we found in 2006. After 2006, every 2 or 3 years, sometimes bonobo got respiratory diseases. So I don't know why before researchers provisioned the bonobo by using sugarcane, but they stopped provisioning in 1996. The first outbreak of disease, respiratory disease, occurred in 2006. After that, every 2-3 years, similar outbreaks repeatedly occurred. So first, bonobo at Wamba, local villagers usually use in the forest the bonobo ranges. Also, bonobo sometimes come to the agriculture field to get sugarcane in the field. So in such situation, but outbreaks of diseases just these days repeatedly occur. So if you have some ideas, reasons.
You mean ideas about the disease circulating, on why it will be like 2-3 years lag between each outbreak? Well,
it's after 2006, 2008, 2009, 2000. So, but before 2006, about 30 years, we studied bonobo 30 years, but we didn't see any outbreaks of respiratory diseases. So at that time, I considered not only, so some diseases are from outside. Outside means not only local people, but some other areas, somehow big cities, or sometimes come from foreign countries.
I have no idea about the disease, but it's interesting the fact that it's recurrent, it's redundant, and it subsists, but with also a very like a regular reemergence and rhythm. This is interesting. I have no answer to that, but it will be interesting to see what has changed since then in terms potentially of edges or roads of logging or maybe access to mine or hunters. What has happened, what has changed that could have introduced that or reintroduce it, and if it's persistent in the environment. I have really no answer to that.
So when sometimes the tourists foreign can come from foreign countries, at that time, how do we need to be care how to check the health condition of tourists, or how do we need to do? I want to consider. I want to know.
Yeah. Well, I know that in the Thai forest, people are quarantined, and I think with the coronavirus and the emergence of the SARS-CoV-2, most of us who work on primates were very cautious about that. And I know that Clive, who is now joined, we met in Uganda actually when they were quarantined before going to Budongo, if I'm not mistaken. We self-quarantine ourselves before going to the forest, and clearly if people have respiratory diseases, they are not allowed in the forest. I know also in Thai that they have special toilet for the newcomers, and they move to different blocks before being allowed to close to the chimpanzees. And I think, Clive, is it the same in Budongo? Like, what measures are taken to prevent Anthropo zoonotic diseases to be transmitted to the primates?
Well, we were actually at Bugoma, sorry.
Bugoma,
and at Bugoma, excuse me, I don't have COVID right now. At Bugoma, you basically have to wash your feet in strong solution before going to the forest, and wash your hands. Anytime you go in the forest, there's a quarantine period. And this was a year and a half ago. It's gotten more strict from what I understand since then. And at this point, what I've understand from Bugoma is that all the employees have been vaccinated. So, and face masks anytime anyone is near the chimpanzees. When I was there, I wasn't even working with the chimpanzees directly, but with artifacts and things like that. So there was a lot of care taken to make sure the chimps weren't exposed or anything was exposed. No spitting in the forest, things like that. No, yeah.
Yeah, it's a very good point you mentioned, because we are always asked to wash maybe our hands, and you said your feet, but when we cross borders, we have even to leave the food, at the custom, but we are never asked to wash our shoes, right? Or goods you have in your bag that you've been walking around with. And that's one of the theory of the spread of the chytrid mushroom on amphibians, right? It's because people have been in the field in different places, and you have the spores, and then actually researchers and hikers and travelers have been spreading it in the world. So this is a very good point also that you brought, because I think not a lot of people are conscious about that. When they go to the field, they have their perspective on why they are there and what they are going to do, but they don't really think about the risk of disease. Just also to follow up on that, like when I started to work in those fragmented landscapes, even though there is quite an intense human activity, like hunters and logging and charcoal production, I imposed to the group that I brought to not to pee and to go to the toilet in the forest, just to avoid introducing our own potential pathogens, knowing though that there were 320 people living on top of the mountain and not having trees, which might seem a bit ridiculous, but I think we were coming from elsewhere, so we were also potentially introducing totally exogenous pathogens. So it was also being very self-conscious about our own impact as researcher when we work in actually vulnerable landscapes, not to make them even more vulnerable. So I don't know, Cecile, if you want to add, or if anyone else wants to add something.
I want to, sorry. I want to raise a point that you've made about trying to understand these issues from a multifactorial point of view. I think it's excellent. All the examples that you have mentioned about preventing disease, but we have the case of bonobo in Wamba. And maybe I can't remember about the chimpanzees in Gombe, but provisioning and contact with people may have had, and we are still, my feeling is that we still don't know what the potential variables are and factors involved in dealing with this. And I'm going to be very sort of fundamentalist about this. I think we tend to look at the detail rather than the bigger picture. And I think we need both. So when we talk about fragmentation, when we talk about disease, when we talk about these things, let's try and have the bigger picture also in our minds, so that when we talk about avoiding, preventing disease in your particular sites, we can also collect data on potential variables that could be affecting the outbreaks. So that's my Dominus Obiscum.
I think these are great closing words.
Yeah. Yeah. I think
definitely thinking from a multifactorial and multi-species perspective, is also what I would remember after this, and then it requires multiple disciplines and people to do so. So I hope this discussion would trigger more ideas and that kind of research.
And I also wanted to add that when we speak about species, I know in this group we seem to understand that a species can be a microorganism, but most of the time people think of a species or like microscopic. And so that's why it's very interesting to see all those different work, and considering also that parasites and virus and bacteria see you as a habitat and a changing habitat, which they are adapting and have to adapt, and he's being fragmented as well. And as such, I think, as you said, I think the bigger picture is clearly multiple scales and temporal and spatial, but also, at factorial as immunological, as we say. And I think we don't understand all yet the development of this, the immune system, what are the drivers really. And from what we've discussed so far, I think they are interesting, I think, synergies, and we should keep in touch and definitely discuss that further. So I think we should, give back the room to the next people. I thank you all for your participation. I wish we had more people attending. I hope people will watch this discussion. But anyway, it was great to meet you, and I hope we will meet next year in person in Rwanda or in the field in Congo.
Malamu. See you there.
Malamu.
Tokumunana.